Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I'd spent most of my adult life in places like this. Quiet, remote, rugged. It's a life I chose. A solace I found in the vast, untamed corners of the country. Before joining the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, I was a Yellowstone field researcher, comfortable with the profound silence of trekking alone through vast stretches of forest and backcountry. I'd faced down grizzlies and spent weeks with only wolves for company. But my assignment now, simple enough on paper, felt different from the start. Cull elk and collect biological samples in the Gila Wilderness, following a shocking and unexplained 40% drop in population over the past 18 months. The Gila is no Yellowstone, though. Yellowstone has a certain rugged grandeur and openness to its wildness. The Gila is rougher somehow, more primal and less forgiving. Dense, thorny forests tumble into shadowed canyons that seem to swallow the light whole. The terrain conspires to make you feel like an intruder. It feels untouched. Not in a pristine way, but in a way that suggests even the locals know better than to go too far in. I'd made camp 3 miles off the main trail last night near Turkey Feather Pass, and had pushed even farther north this morning toward the headwaters of Bear Wallow Creek. My objective was to collar elk in an area where motion-triggered cameras had picked up something deeply odd, herds breaking apart in blind panic, scattering for no discernible reason. It didn't match the behavior of any known predator, wolf, lion, or bear. By noon, I reached the area I'd marked on my map. An open meadow, a serene-looking clearing ringed by old-growth spruce and ponderosa pine. My boots sank slightly into the soft, dark earth, still damp from recent rains. I paused to get my bearings and check my gear. Tranquilizer rifle strapped securely over one shoulder, tagging supplies in my backpack, and the biological sampling kit secured to my belt. Everything was accounted for. The first sign that something was profoundly wrong hit me about 50 yards into the clearing. It was the quiet, unnatural, suffocating quiet. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that silence often signals danger. The tense pause before a predator strikes. But this was different. It wasn't a pause. It was a vacuum, as if sound itself was being actively suppressed. I scanned the tree line slowly, my hand resting on the stock of my rifle. But there was nothing. No shapes moving through the brush. No flicker of a tail. No signs of disturbance whatsoever. I nearly stumbled on the first elk without seeing it. It lay perfectly still, collapsed in the tall grass as if it had simply laid down for a nap. Kneeling, I touched its flank gingerly. Cold. Stone cold. Rigor mortis had already set in, the limbs stiff as iron, suggesting it had been dead for at least 48 hours. But that was impossible. The grass beneath the massive body was fresh, green, and completely undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no churned-up mud. More unnerving still, no wounds, no blood, no bite marks from predators. Not even a scratch, nothing. As I rose and looked around the meadow, a cold knot tightened in my chest. There were more. 5 additional elk lay scattered evenly across the clearing, forming a near-perfect circle with the first one I'd found. Each was positioned in the same bizarre, placid state, lying down, legs stiffly extended, necks stretched out and eyes wide open, staring at the empty sky. Their tongues protruded slightly, a grotesque uniform touch to an already surreal scene. Dark fluid had dried around their nostrils, forming black crusts that looked almost painted on. I forced my training to take over, pushing back the rising tide of dread. I moved from one carcass to the next, completing a grim circuit around the clearing, documenting the same inexplicable symptoms in my field notebook. No trauma, no scavenging, no apparent cause of death. Methodically, my hands moving with a precision that belied the tremor in my gut. I took tissue samples, hair samples, blood samples from each animal. I labeled each glass tube with meticulous care, the scratch of my pen the only sound in the unnerving stillness. The whole time, I fought off the distinct and terrifying feeling that the forest had gone even quieter, as if it were watching me work. When I knelt beside the 4th elk, I noticed something I'd missed before. The pupils of their eyes were completely dilated, blown wide with what could only be described as absolute terror. Whatever had killed them, they'd seen it coming. It took me an hour to finish. The samples were critical and needed to get to the lab immediately. But when I tried my satellite phone, the signal struggled, flickering with a single weak bar before dropping out completely. No connection. I tucked the precious samples securely into a cooled pouch in my pack and stood, knowing I would have to carry them out myself tomorrow morning. As dusk began to bleed through the trees, I made camp just outside the meadow, seeking the meager shelter of a thick spruce stand. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't tired. I was coiled tight, every instinct screaming at me to pack up and get out now. But logic, the scientist in me, held me back. There had to be a rational explanation. A localized disease, a toxic fungus, an environmental poison. I couldn't abandon my assignment without more data. I lay awake long after darkness fell, staring at the thin nylon of my tent wall, listening intently. The forest had finally begun to stir again. The faint rustlings of nocturnal animals, the distant soothing murmur of the creek. Normalcy was returning. Then everything went quiet once more. In that absolute silence came a sound I know I will never be able to erase from my memory. A long, piercing scream that erupted from somewhere high above the ridge. It wasn't human. It wasn't elk, mountain lion, bear, or coyote. I've heard every sound the North American wilderness can produce, and this was none of them. The scream rose in a sharp, agonizing crescendo, a sound of pure terror and rage, and then it abruptly cut off, leaving a void of silence that felt deeper and more threatening than before. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat bolt upright, my hand closing around the cold steel of my tranquilizer rifle. Then came a sudden sharp snap of brush. Close, maybe 20 yards out. Another followed, slightly off to my right. Whatever was out there was moving deliberately, circling my tent at irregular intervals. Each crack of a branch, each crunch of leaf litter sounded heavy, intentional, methodical. This was no deer wandering by. With a trembling hand, I clicked on my high-lumen flashlight, tore open the tent flap, and blasted the beam into the trees. I saw nothing, just the stark white trunks of aspens, the deep shadows between them and empty spaces where something should have been standing. Slowly, methodically, I swept the light in a full circle around my campsite. Nothing moved, but I knew with a certainty that went deeper than sight that something was there, watching me from just beyond the edge of the light. The beam caught something on a low branch. 3 long scratches gouged deep into the bark, fresh sap still weeping from the wounds. They were at least 8 feet off the ground. I zipped the tent closed again and waited. My back pressed against my pack, rifle in my lap, eyes wide open in the oppressive dark, fully aware I wouldn't sleep another minute until daylight came. At the first pale hint of dawn, I abandoned any pretense of scientific duty. My fingers, clumsy and shaking, fumbled with my gear. It wasn't the morning cold that caused the tremor, but a raw-edged dread I'd never experienced before. Not even when I'd been bluff-charged by a grizzly in Yellowstone. Every instinct I possessed shouted at me to leave, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the clearing of dead elk, between me and whatever had patiently circled my tent during the long dark night. I set out quickly, heading south along a narrow game trail that would eventually lead toward the ranger station near Bonner Canyon. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the trees, I forced myself to breathe evenly, to rationalize my fear, exhaustion, solitude, and an overactive imagination playing cruel tricks. But no amount of logic could erase the memory of that scream echoing through the darkness or the deliberate sound of something circling my fragile tent. By midday, I came across a cluster of elk bones scattered across the trail. I knelt to examine them, and a fresh wave of ice flowed through my veins. The bones were entirely clean, unnaturally stripped of every shred of muscle, sinew, and ligament. What remained had been carefully arranged in precise anatomical order, the ribs laid out in a perfect parallel fan, the vertebrae aligned in a neat, delicate column like some macabre biology lesson. There were no teeth marks from scavengers, no evidence of insects or decomposition. The scene felt clinical, sterile, almost purposeful. It wasn't a kill site. It was an exhibit, a display meant to be seen, understood, feared. I stood back up, the acidic taste of bile rising in my throat. A sudden sound behind me, a heavy footstep, the definitive crunch of a boot on gravel. It was so close it sent a jolt of electricity up my spine. I spun around, pulse leaping, scanning the trees and the trail behind me. Nothing. Only silence and the gentle sway of pine branches in an imperceptible breeze. I exhaled sharply, my breath clouding in the air despite the mild temperature. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but the forest around me felt suffocating, oppressive, as if the trees themselves were leaning in closer. I started walking again, faster this time, my stride purposeful and urgent. After only a few steps, the sound returned, a distinct rhythmic crunch on the forest floor, matching my stride perfectly. I took one step. A second later, a step echoed mine. I took 3 quick steps. 3 quick crunches answered in exact synchronization. I stopped dead. So did it. My throat went dry. I tested it again and again, raw panic clawing at my throat as the horrifying pattern continued with mechanical precision. This wasn't an echo or a coincidence. It was deliberate, mocking mimicry. Something was matching my every movement, learning my rhythm, playing with me like a cat with a wounded mouse. Unable to stand it any longer, I broke from the trail, veering sharply into the dense undergrowth. I plunged through thorny catclaw acacia, the spines ripping at my pants and legs, drawing blood that ran warm down my shins. I didn't care. I welcomed the pain, something tangible to anchor me against the rising wave of unreasoning fear. The footsteps behind me ceased for a moment, only to be replaced by the heavy snapping and crunching of something much larger forcing its way through the brush nearby, paralleling my course with ease. Branches broke with sharp cracks that sounded like gunshots in the oppressive quiet. Desperation surged through me. I pressed forward, ignoring the pain, until the forest floor gave way to a steep rocky slope. I scrambled up, loose grease slipping and clattering beneath my boots. Halfway up the incline, I paused to catch my breath, my lungs burning, gripping the rough stone for support. And that's when I saw it. Below me, standing motionless under a deep rock overhang, was a figure unlike anything I had ever encountered. It was tall, impossibly so, at least 7 feet, with unnaturally elongated limbs draped in what looked like ragged patchwork animal hide stitched together with sinew. Its body was emaciated, skeletal, the outline of its ribcage clearly visible beneath the tattered skins. But the head, I couldn't make out its features clearly. There was only a hollow, absolute darkness beneath what appeared to be some sort of hood fashioned from antlers and sun-bleached bone. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just remained perfectly still, a silent, tenebrous shape observing me from the shadows. Then, slowly, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at me. The gesture was deliberate, accusatory, as if marking me for something I couldn't comprehend. My paralysis broke in a surge of pure adrenaline. I turned and lunged upward, scrambling desperately over the jagged terrain. My pack caught on a jutting piece of granite, and without a second thought I shrugged out of the straps, letting it fall away, my precious supplies scattering down the rocks. I couldn't afford to stop, couldn't dare to look back. Behind me, the sound began again. The clear, rhythmic footsteps, steady and unhurried, crunching on leaves and breaking twigs. Whatever it was moved effortlessly through the same obstacles I struggled to navigate. I saw a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders and stumbled into it, pressing myself flat into the gap, my chest heaving, sweat streaming down my face despite the unnatural cold. The approaching footsteps slowed and finally stopped just beyond my hiding spot. I held my breath, willing myself silent, listening, and then I heard it. The low, rasping sound of slow, measured breathing just on the other side of the rock. It was so close I could smell its breath, a rancid, earthy odor, sour and ancient like something that had been buried and recently unearthed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears like a drum, a frantic countdown to inevitable discovery. But discovery never came. Instead, I remained wedged there, tense and rigid as daylight gradually faded into the deep purple of twilight. The breathing never shifted, never retreated. It simply lingered, a patient, terrifying presence in the dark, content to wait me out. At dawn, I forced my stiff, aching body from the narrow gap. The space beyond the boulders was empty. I started cautiously downhill, trying to orient myself toward Bonner Canyon. Hours passed. Gradually, landmarks became familiar. The abandoned logging road, the crooked stump where the trail forked. Then I found it. My field notebook, lying open and perfectly centered on the trail, miles from where I'd dropped my pack. The elastic band that held it closed was missing. Inside, on a blank page, someone had drawn a simple symbol, a circle with 6 dots arranged around it, the same pattern as the dead elk. By the time I finally reached the ranger station at dusk, I was hypothermic and delirious. I stumbled inside and barricaded the door. Sleep took me swiftly. The next morning, a forest patrol found me and rushed me to the district office. When the lab results finally arrived 2 weeks later, my supervisor called me in. His expression was grim. "The elk you found," he began, his voice low. "Something happened to their bodies on a cellular level. The tissues showed evidence of flash freezing, the kind of rapid crystallization that normally only happens with liquid nitrogen exposure. But it was mild out there, right?" I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "Yes, temperatures were in the 60s. He hesitated. "And there was something else. Their adrenal glands were flooded with stress hormones, levels that were biologically impossible. They were literally scared to death, and then frozen solid in an instant." His eyes, full of deep, weary concern, fixed on mine. "This isn't the first time something inexplicable has come out of the gala. There are old reports we always dismissed. If I were you, I'd request reassignment." He didn't have to tell me twice. 3 months later, I work at a wildlife center in suburban Albuquerque, tracking urban coyotes. Safe, mundane, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scream echoing in my memory. And I know with absolute certainty that whatever I encountered in the Gila is still out there, still watching, still waiting. And God help the next person who wanders into its territory. Before I joined the National Park Service, I spent 3 years working as a wilderness trail guide for Summit Adventures, a small outfit operating out of Groveland near the eastern entrance to Yosemite. The work was extraordinary. Most days I woke up feeling like the luckiest person alive, leading groups through some of the most breathtaking terrain on Earth. The memories from those years are almost entirely filled with sunlight, laughter, and the kind of bone-deep satisfaction that comes from helping people connect with nature. Almost entirely. There's one trip that stands apart from all the others. One job that I remember for reasons that have nothing to do with scenic vistas or satisfied clients. It was late September of 2017, just as the summer crowds were thinning and the air was beginning to carry that first whisper of autumn. I'd been assigned to guide a corporate group up Half Dome, one of those team-building exercises that had become increasingly common, especially as we approached the holiday season. The setup was standard. Meet the group in Groveland, drive them to the trailhead, hike up to Little Yosemite Valley, spend the night around a campfire doing trust exercises and motivational activities, then summit Half Dome the following morning before hiking back down. I'd done variations of this trip dozens of times. The formula worked, the clients left happy, and I got paid to spend time in the wilderness. What could be better? This particular group consisted of 7 people from some tech startup in San Francisco, 4 men and 3 women, all in their late 20s to mid-30s. They'd chartered us for a 2-day wilderness experience, and on paper they seemed like any other corporate team. The company had paid extra for the premium package, which meant better camping equipment and more one-on-one attention from me as their guide. I remember the morning we set out. The sky was that particular shade of crystalline blue that only exists in the Sierra Nevada, and the air smelled of pine and granite. As we gathered at the trailhead, I went through my usual safety briefing, checking everyone's boots, water supplies, and general fitness levels. Some of them looked more comfortable in the outdoors than others. One of the women had clearly hiked before, her gear worn but well maintained, while a couple of the men kept fidgeting with their new backpacks, trying to adjust straps that would probably chafe by mile 3. But nothing about them screamed trouble. They seemed like a normal group of office workers trying to bond outside their usual environment of conference rooms and coffee machines. I had no way of knowing that within 24 hours I would be standing over a broken body at the bottom of a cliff, my hands slick with someone else's blood, while a murderer stood beside me pretending to be concerned. As we began our ascent toward Little Yosemite Valley, I fell into the familiar rhythm of my job, keeping the pace manageable, pointing out interesting flora and fauna, making sure everyone was drinking enough water and taking breaks before they needed them. The trail from the valley floor gains elevation gradually at first, winding through mixed conifer forest where shafts of sunlight pierce the canopy like golden spears. I always watched my groups carefully during those first few miles. You learn a lot about people from how they handle themselves on a trail. Some push too hard, too fast, trying to prove something. Others lag behind, either from lack of fitness or from being too absorbed in the scenery. The best hikers find a sustainable pace and stick to it, conserving energy for the long haul. Two of the men quickly established themselves at the front of the group. One was tall, maybe 6'3", with sandy hair, and the kind of lean build that suggested he ran marathons or did triathlons. He introduced himself as Byron. The other was shorter but stockier, with dark hair and a ready smile. His name was Trevor. From the way they interacted, it was clear they were the leaders of this little corporate pack. The others deferred to them, laughed at their jokes a beat too quickly, arranged themselves in the hiking order based on some invisible office hierarchy. The three women stuck together in the middle of the group. Their names were Helen, Donna, and Grace. Helen seemed to be the most senior, her interactions with the men suggesting she held some kind of management position. Donna was quieter, spending more time photographing the scenery than talking. Grace was nervous. You could see it in the way she gripped her hiking poles, the way her eyes darted to the drop-offs beside the trail. The fourth man, Lawrence, brought up the rear with me. He was heavy-set and clearly struggling with the elevation gain, but he had a good attitude about it, making self-deprecating jokes about his gym membership going to waste. I liked him immediately. We reached Little Yosemite Valley by mid-afternoon, the granite walls opening up to reveal the flat forested expanse where we'd make camp. I helped them set up their tents in a designated site near the river, the sound of rushing water providing a constant backdrop. As I went through the process of getting the camp organized, demonstrating how to properly store food away from bears, setting up the camp stove, arranging rocks for the fire circle, I noticed Byron and Trevor having an intense conversation off to one side. There was nothing obviously wrong about it. Colleagues talk, friends talk, but something about their body language bothered me. Byron was doing most of the talking, his hand gestures sharp and emphatic. Trevor's arms were crossed, his jaw set. At one point, Byron poked Trevor in the chest with his index finger, and Trevor knocked his hand away. Then they both noticed me watching, and their demeanors changed instantly. Smiles appeared. Byron clapped Trevor on the shoulder. They walked back toward the group as if nothing had happened. But I'd seen what I'd seen. After dinner, freeze-dried meals rehydrated over the camp stove, which everyone claimed was delicious with the enthusiasm of people who'd never been truly hungry. I led the group through some team-building exercises around the fire. Trust falls, group problem-solving scenarios, sharing personal stories about overcoming challenges, the usual corporate bonding stuff. Everyone participated with varying degrees of genuine engagement. Helen took it seriously, clearly viewing this as an investment in her team's cohesion. Donna seemed more interested in the stars beginning to appear overhead. Grace was still nervous, jumping slightly every time a branch cracked in the darkness beyond our circle of firelight. Lawrence made everyone laugh with his stories, and Byron and Trevor, well, they performed their parts adequately, but there was a tension between them that had nothing to do with trust falls. Around 9 o'clock, as the fire was burning down to coals, Byron stood up and stretched. "Trevor and I need to discuss something about the merger," he announced casually. "Just some work stuff. We'll walk a bit, be back in a few minutes." I didn't like it. The rule on my trips was simple. Nobody wanders off alone after dark. The wilderness at night is a different animal than during the day. Sounds carry strangely. Landmarks become invisible. Even experienced outdoorsmen can get disoriented, and we were miles from the nearest road, in country where black bears were common, and mountain lions, though rare, were not unheard of. "Stay within earshot," I told them firmly, "and take a flashlight. Back in 10 minutes maximum." Byron gave me a dismissive wave that immediately annoyed me. Trevor grabbed a flashlight but didn't meet my eyes as they walked off into the darkness. The rest of us stayed by the fire, but the mood had shifted. Whatever corporate team spirit we'd been building felt fragile now, threatened by the unspoken tension between those two men. After a few minutes of uncomfortable small talk, Helen suggested everyone turn in for the night. We had an early start tomorrow. The climb up Half Dome's cables required being at the base by sunrise to avoid the midday heat and afternoon thunderstorms, but I couldn't turn in. Byron and Trevor had been gone for 15 minutes and I was responsible for everyone's safety. I stood up, grabbed my own flashlight, and told the others I'd make sure the guys found their way back to camp. Helen, you're in charge until I return, I said. Keep everyone by the fire. I walked in the direction Byron and Trevor had gone, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness between the trees. The forest at night always makes me hyper-aware of sounds. My own footsteps on pine needles, the distant rush of the Merced River, the occasional crack of a branch, the hoot of an owl somewhere overhead. And then voices. Angry voices. I slowed my pace, not wanting to stumble into the middle of their conversation, but needing to make sure they were all right. The voices grew clearer as I approached, though they were trying to keep their volume down. The words came through in harsh, emphatic bursts. Think you can just. That was Trevor's voice. I'm telling you how it is, Byron, his tone cold and certain. After everything, business is business, you know that. This isn't business, Byron. You're trying to push me out. There was a pause, and when Byron spoke again, his voice carried something that made my skin prickle. It wasn't quite a threat. The words themselves were innocuous enough, but the tone underneath was sharp as broken glass. Push you out? Trevor, buddy, you're being paranoid. I'm looking out for the company. If you can't see that, well, maybe you're not the right fit anymore. Is that what this is? Trevor's voice rose, and I could hear real fear underneath the anger now. You want me out of the way? Fine, Byron. Good luck with that, but I'm not just going to disappear because it's convenient for you. Oh, is that it? Byron's voice dropped lower, intimate and menacing. You want me out of the way? Well, good luck, buddy. Good luck with. I called out then, my voice loud in the darkness. Byron, Trevor, time to head back to camp. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of movement in the underbrush. My flashlight beam found them, standing about 15 feet apart. Byron's face calm and composed, Trevor's flushed and agitated. Just finishing up here, Byron called back, his voice now friendly and relaxed, as if the conversation I'd overheard had never happened. Be right there. They emerged from the trees a minute later, walking side by side like nothing was wrong. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see Trevor's hands were trembling slightly, but his expression was carefully neutral. We walked back to camp together, nobody speaking. The fire had burned down to embers by the time we arrived. The others were already in their tents, and Byron and Trevor said goodnight before heading to their own. I stayed up another hour banking the fire and organizing gear for the morning, but mostly just sitting in the darkness and wondering what the hell had just happened. Out of the way. The phrase kept echoing in my mind. In a business context, it could mean fired, demoted, reassigned, but there had been something else in Byron's voice, something that suggested a more permanent solution. I told myself I was being ridiculous. These were just office workers having a dispute about a merger. People argued about work all the time. It didn't mean anything sinister. But that night, as I finally crawled into my own tent, I found myself unable to shake a creeping sense of dread that had nothing to do with the wilderness darkness outside. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold. I was up before everyone else, as always, getting the camp stove going for coffee and oatmeal. The smell of brewing coffee gradually drew people from their tents, bleary-eyed and stiff from sleeping on the ground. Trevor emerged looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept about as well as I had. Byron, by contrast, seemed refreshed and energetic, stretching and joking with Helen about the snoring that had apparently emanated from Lawrence's tent all night. We broke camp efficiently, everyone moving through the choreographed routine of stuffing sleeping bags, collapsing tents, and redistributing gear. The plan was to leave the camping equipment here at the valley site and hike up Half Dome with just day packs containing water, snacks, and emergency supplies. We'd return to this spot by early afternoon, pack everything up and hike back down to the trailhead. The trail from Little Yosemite Valley to the base of Half Dome is approximately 4 miles, gaining about 2,000 feet of elevation. It's not technically difficult, just steep and relentless, switchbacks cutting back and forth across granite slopes. As we climbed, the trees thinned and the views expanded. Below us, the valley spread out in shades of green and gray. Above us, Half Dome's distinctive profile dominated the sky, a massive granite monolith that looked like someone had sliced a mountain in half with a cosmic knife. The group's earlier cohesion, already strained by whatever was happening between Byron and Trevor, began to fragment further. The physical challenge of the climb sorted people according to fitness levels. Helen and Byron pulled ahead, maintaining a strong, steady pace. Donna and Grace stuck together in the middle ground. Lawrence fell behind again, though he was still gamely pushing forward. And Trevor seemed distracted, unfocused. Several times I had to call out to him when he drifted too close to the edge of the trail, where 100-foot drops waited for the careless or inattentive. We reached the subdome around 8:30 in the morning. This is where the trail becomes more serious. A steep granite slope, equipped with cables and wooden posts to help hikers pull themselves up. It's strenuous but manageable for most people with a reasonable fitness level and no fear of heights. Grace took one look at the cables and went pale. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I could, but I can't." I'd seen this before, the difference between imagining a challenge and facing it in reality. "That's completely fine," I assured her. "Helen, can you wait here with Grace? Lawrence, you want to take a break too?" Lawrence nodded gratefully, already breathing hard from the climb. The three of them settled on some rocks in a shaded area while the rest of us prepared to tackle the final ascent. Byron insisted on going first. "I've done this before," he announced, though I hadn't heard him mention any previous half-dome climbs. "Last time I was here was 2015. It's easier than it looks." He attacked the cables with aggressive confidence, pulling himself up hand over hand, barely pausing between the wooden posts. Donna went next, moving more carefully but competently. Then Trevor, who seemed to regain some focus as he concentrated on the physical task. I brought up the rear, as always, making sure everyone was using the cables correctly and not taking unnecessary risks. The summit of Half Dome is roughly the size of 17 football fields, a relatively flat expanse of granite that offers 360-degree views of the Sierra Nevada. On a clear day like this one, you could see for 100 miles in every direction. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the air was thin enough to make you feel slightly dizzy, like you were standing on the roof of the world. We spent about 45 minutes at the summit. People took photos, ate snacks, marveled at the views. Byron stood at the far eastern edge, his arms spread wide like he was king of the mountain. Trevor stayed closer to the center, sitting on the granite and staring out toward Cloud's Rest in the distance. I kept an eye on my watch. The rule for Half Dome is to be off the summit by early afternoon. Thunderstorms can roll in quickly, and being on an exposed granite dome during a lightning storm is a recipe for disaster. We had plenty of time, but I wanted to get moving before too long. "All right, everyone," I called out. "Take your last photos, use the bathroom if you need to. There's a very primitive toilet at the summit, and let's start heading down in 10 minutes. That's when Byron walked over to Trevor and said something I couldn't hear. Trevor stood up, and the two of them walked toward the northern edge of the summit, where the granite dropped away in a sheer cliff. Byron had his phone out, probably taking pictures, I thought. I should have followed them immediately. But Donna was asking me questions about the geology of the dome, and I got distracted explaining how glaciers had carved and polished the granite over millions of years. By the time I looked up again, Byron and Trevor had moved out of sight, somewhere beyond the curve of the summit. "I'm going to round everyone up," I announced. "Start heading toward the cables. I'll make sure Byron and Trevor are right behind you." I walked toward where I'd last seen them, my boots scuffing against the rough granite. The summit of Half Dome isn't entirely flat. It has gentle undulations, slight rises and falls that can hide someone from view if they're more than 50 feet away. I crested a low rise and saw them ahead, standing near the northern edge. Byron still had his phone out, but he wasn't taking pictures of the view. He was looking at his phone screen, scrolling through something, while Trevor stood closer to the edge, also looking at his own phone. "Gentlemen," I called out, "time to head down." Byron looked up and waved. "Just getting a few more shots. Be right there." I started to turn away, and then I heard it. A sharp, truncated yell. Not quite a scream, but a sound of sudden shock and fear. I spun back around and saw Trevor was gone. Byron stood alone at the edge, his hand outstretched toward nothing, his phone fallen on the granite. For a frozen second, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then Byron started shouting, "Help! God, somebody help!" He fell. Trevor fell. I ran. My boots pounded across the granite as I covered the distance to where Byron stood, still staring down over the edge, his face a mask of shock. When I reached him, I grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back from the edge. People in traumatic situations sometimes don't think clearly, and the last thing I needed was Byron following Trevor over the side. "What happened?" I demanded. "Tell me exactly what happened." "He was taking a picture." Byron's words came out in a rush, stumbling over each other. "He was trying to get closer to the edge for a better angle. I told him to be careful. He was looking at his phone screen, backing up, and then God, he just slipped. 1 second he was there and the next he was falling. I tried to grab him, but I couldn't." I moved to the edge and looked down, my stomach clenching. Half Dome's northern face isn't quite vertical in all places. There are sections of steep slope interspersed with sheer drops. About 200 feet below, I could see a dark shape against the gray granite. "Trevor." He wasn't moving. "Stay here," I ordered Byron. "Don't move from this spot." Then I was running back toward the others, already pulling my radio from my belt. In 2017, cell phones rarely worked this deep in the backcountry, but Park Service radios operated on different frequencies and had better range. "Summit Base. This is Guide 17. Emergency situation. Over." I kept my voice as calm as possible, though my heart was jackhammering against my ribs. "We have a fall victim on Half Dome, northern face. Male approximately 30 years old, fell approximately 200 feet. Appears unconscious. Requesting immediate assistance, life flight if available. Over." The response crackled back almost immediately. My boss, Gary, his voice tight with concern.
Guide 17. Confirm location. Northern face of Half Dome Summit?
Affirmative. Below the summit, on the slope leading down to Tenaya Canyon. I need to get down there to assess his condition. He's not moving. Roger that. Rangers are mobilizing now. Life flight is being contacted. Give me your exact coordinates. I rattled off the GPS coordinates from my device while simultaneously trying to think through the logistics. The slope Trevor had fallen down was too steep to descend directly from the summit. I'd need to get back down to the subdome, then find a route along the base of the northern face. That would take time, precious time that Trevor might not have. Donna had heard me on the radio and came running over, her face pale. "Oh God. Oh God. Is he—" "I need you to listen carefully," I interrupted. "Take everyone else and wait at the subdome. Do not attempt to descend without me. Keep Grace and Helen calm. I'm going down to Trevor with Byron, but I need the rest of you together and safe. Can you do that?" She nodded, already moving to round up the others. Byron appeared at my side. "I'm coming with you," he said. His face was white, his hands trembling, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Determination? Fear? Something else? "Can you handle it?" I asked bluntly. "If you panic or freeze, you're a liability." "I can handle it. I need to help him, please." I didn't have time to argue, and honestly, an extra pair of hands might be useful. "Then stay close and do exactly what I say. If you can't keep up, you wait and let me go ahead. Understood?" "Understood." We descended the cables faster than was safe, half climbing and half sliding, the leather gloves I always carried protecting our hands from the metal cable's bite. At the subdome, I told the others again to stay put, that Rangers were on their way, and that Byron and I would be back as soon as we could. Then we were off the main trail, scrambling over rough terrain, trying to find a path that would take us around to the northern face. The granite here was a maze of cracks, slabs, and boulders. Several times we had to backtrack when we hit dead ends. My radio crackled periodically with updates. Rangers were en route on ATVs. Life flight was spinning up, ETA approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. We finally found a route that took us along the base of the northern face, and then we were climbing up the steep slope, moving as quickly as we dared over loose rock and smooth granite. My breath came in harsh gasps, partly from exertion, partly from the adrenaline flooding my system. "Is he dead?" Byron asked from behind me. "Do you think he's dead?" "I don't know," I answered without looking back. "People survive falls. It depends on what he hit, how he landed. But that far, 200 feet. I don't know," I repeated more firmly. "We'll know when we get there." We scrambled upward, and then I saw Trevor again. Closer now, He was lying on a section of relatively flat rock, his body positioned at an unnatural angle. Even from 20 feet away, I could see dark stains on the granite around him.
Blood.
A lot of blood. The human body is not designed to fall 200 feet down a granite slope. Every rock, every protrusion, every change in angle inflicts damage. Bones break, flesh tears, organs rupture. As I knelt beside Trevor's crumpled form, I had to fight down the urge to vomit at what I was seeing. His right leg was bent backward at the knee, the joint destroyed. His left arm was twisted underneath his body. His face, his face was barely recognizable, a mass of abrasions and swelling where he'd struck rocks during his tumbling descent. Blood leaked from his ears and nose, staining his hiking shirt. But when I pressed my fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse, I found one. Weak, thready, irregular, but there. "He's alive," I said, and Byron made a choking sound behind me. "Trevor, can you hear me? Trevor?" No response. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and labored. I pulled my first aid kit from my pack, hands moving automatically through procedures I'd practiced but hoped never to use in reality. Airway, breathing, circulation. Check for spinal injuries, a useless exercise in this case, since he'd already been thrown 200 feet down a mountain. Stop the bleeding where I could, stabilize what I couldn't fix. Byron hovered beside me, his hands fluttering uselessly. "Is he going to make it? Can you help him?" "I'm doing what I can. Radio the others. Tell them we're with Trevor now and he's alive." While Byron fumbled with the radio, I worked. A pressure bandage on the worst of the head wounds. Gentle probing of his chest that made me wince. Multiple rib fractures, probably. I didn't dare move him more than necessary. Internal bleeding was almost certainly occurring, and without a hospital, without imaging equipment, without surgery. No, don't think like that. The life flight is coming. Professional medical help is coming. Just keep him alive until then. "My phone," Trevor suddenly mumbled, his eyes still closed. "Picture." "Don't try to talk," I said. "Save your strength. Help is coming." "So beautiful," he whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Wanted picture." Then he went silent again, his breathing becoming more labored. Byron had gotten through to the others and was now giving updates to headquarters on my radio. Between transmissions, he kept saying things, a constant stream of words that I barely registered as I worked. "It was an accident. You saw it was an accident, right? He just slipped. 1 second he was fine, and the next he was gone. There was nothing I could do. I tried to grab him. I swear I tried, but it happened so fast. Too fast. 1 second and he was gone. It wasn't my fault. You know that, right? It wasn't my fault." The words washed over me as I focused on Trevor's injuries. Airway still clear. Breathing still present. Pulse still detectable. I was doing everything my training had taught me, but I knew it wasn't enough. Trevor needed a trauma surgeon, a blood transfusion, an operating room. He needed miracles I couldn't provide on a mountainside with a basic first aid kit. "It wasn't my fault," Byron said again. Then something about his tone finally penetrated my concentration. I looked up at him. His face was white, his eyes wide, his hands still trembling. But beneath the shock, beneath the appropriate responses of someone who'd just witnessed a terrible accident, there was something else. A calculation, a watching. "Of course it wasn't your fault," I said automatically, my attention already returning to Trevor. "Accidents happen." "Right. Accidents happen. In the wilderness, people get hurt. They slip, they fall. Nobody's fault. Just the wilderness." I secured another bandage, my hands slick with blood. Byron's words kept coming, filling the air. "I told him to be careful," I said. "Trevor, watch your step." But he was so focused on getting that picture. He wanted it to be perfect. You know how he is. Always trying to make everything perfect. Always pushing for more. And this time he pushed too far. And it wasn't my fault, it was just bad luck. Just one of those things that happens when you're not paying attention, when you take that one step too many, when you don't listen to warnings. "Byron." My voice cut through his monologue. "I need you to focus. Check his pulse again. Tell me if you feel anything." It was partly to give him something useful to do, partly to shut him up so I could think. He knelt beside me and pressed his fingers to Trevor's wrist, his own hands shaking so badly I doubted he could feel anything. "It's there," he said after a moment. Weak but there. We fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by Trevor's labored breathing and the distant sound of ravens croaking from somewhere higher up the cliff face. I found myself listening for the sound of helicopter rotors, the growl of ATV engines. Anything that would signal help was near. And as I waited, my mind kept circling back to Byron's words. It wasn't my fault. He'd said it at least a dozen times in the past 10 minutes. Maybe that was normal. People in shock often repeated things, but there was something about the way he was framing it, the way he kept emphasizing his lack of responsibility, that felt wrong. In my years as a wilderness guide, I'd seen people respond to emergencies in various ways. Some froze, some panicked, some became hyper-focused and competent. But the one constant across all personality types and situations was this. When someone is badly injured, everyone's attention goes to that injured person. Their needs, their survival, their suffering, that becomes the center of the universe for everyone present. Byron's attention kept drifting back to himself. It wasn't my fault. I tried to help. I told him to be careful. There was nothing I could do. Not, how is he? Will he make it? What else can we do for him? But, I'm not responsible. I did everything right. This isn't on me. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Shock manifests in strange ways. Byron was probably just processing the trauma of witnessing something horrible. And besides, I had more important things to worry about than the psychological state of someone who'd just seen his colleague fall off a cliff. But that overheard conversation from the previous night kept echoing in my head. You want me out of the way? And Byron's response? Good luck with that. I pressed my fingers to Trevor's neck again, feeling that fragile pulse, and silently prayed for the helicopter to hurry. The sound of helicopter rotors is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. It came to us as a distant thumping, gradually growing louder. And when I looked up and saw that aircraft banking around the northern face of Half Dome, I felt tears sting my eyes. They'd made it. Against all the odds, navigating difficult terrain and dangerous air currents, those pilots had made it. Byron was on his feet, waving his arms frantically, though the helicopter crew had obviously already spotted us. The aircraft circled once, the pilot assessing the terrain, then set down about 70 feet away on the only flat area large enough to accommodate it. The rotors never stopped spinning. This would be a hot landing and immediate takeoff. Time was critical. 2 paramedics jumped out, while a third stayed with the helicopter. They were already pulling a stretcher from the aircraft as they ran toward us. Their movements practiced and efficient. One was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair. The other was a younger man with a thick black beard. What have we got? The woman called out as she dropped to her knees beside Trevor. I gave them a rapid rundown, approximate time of fall, distance fallen, injuries observed, vital signs. They were already working as I spoke, pulling out equipment I'd only seen in hospitals, their hands moving with the kind of calm competence that comes from seeing the worst humanity has to offer and dealing with it anyway. Compound fracture right femur, multiple rib fractures, significant head trauma, possible internal bleeding. The woman rattled off to her partner. Get the backboard, we need to move fast. They worked with incredible speed, stabilizing Trevor's neck, carefully rolling him onto the backboard, securing him with straps. An IV line appeared in his arm as if by magic. Oxygen mask over his face. Every movement was purposeful, no wasted motion, no hesitation. You did good work here, the bearded paramedic said to me as they prepared to move Trevor. Quick response, proper first aid, gave him a fighting chance. Byron stepped forward. Is he going to make it? Please, you have to save him. The woman glanced up at him briefly. We're going to do everything we can. Were you with him when he fell? Yes, we were taking pictures. And he slipped. It happened so fast. Any loss of consciousness before the fall? Dizziness, confusion? No, nothing like that. He was fine, and then he just slipped. The paramedics lifted the stretcher, and Byron and I followed as they carried Trevor toward the helicopter. The downdraft from the rotors blasted us with wind and noise. The door opened, and they slid the stretcher inside with practiced efficiency. The bearded paramedic jumped in after it, already doing something with the IV bag. The woman turned to us. You two need to stay here, she shouted over the rotor noise. Rangers are coming up with ATVs. They'll get you back down. Please save him, Byron called out. She nodded, then climbed aboard and pulled the door shut. The helicopter lifted immediately, tilting forward and gaining altitude with breathtaking speed. We watched it arc away over Tenaya Canyon, growing smaller, finally disappearing around the shoulder of Cloud's Rest. Silence descended, broken only by the wind and the harsh sound of our own breathing. Byron sat down heavily on a rock, his head in his hands. I stood looking at the blood-stained granite where Trevor had lain, my first aid supplies scattered around, and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. We waited there for 20 minutes before we heard the sound of engines approaching from below. 2 ATVs appeared. Driven by park rangers, I recognized Phil and Carson, both veterans who'd seen it all. They'd brought extra water, trauma blankets, and grim expressions. "How bad?" Phil asked as he killed his engine. "Bad. Major trauma. Unconscious when they took him, but alive." Carson was already radioing an update to headquarters. Phil walked over to Byron, assessing him with the same practiced eye he'd use on any potential casualty. "You hurt anywhere? Any chest pain? Shortness of breath?" Byron shook his head. "I'm fine. Physically, I mean. But that was horrible. Saw the whole thing, did you?" He was standing right there. Byron pointed to a spot near the edge, taking a picture. I was behind him, doing the same thing. He took a step backward, trying to get a better angle, and his foot slipped. There was this moment where he was falling, windmilling his arms, and I reached for him, but I couldn't. I wasn't close enough. Phil was nodding, his face sympathetic but professional. He'd heard similar stories countless times before. Accidents in the wilderness weren't rare. They were an unfortunate statistical inevitability when you mixed inexperienced people with challenging terrain. We climbed onto the ATVs, me riding with Carson, Byron with Phil. The descent was jarring, the vehicles bouncing over rocks and roots, but it beat scrambling down on foot. We made good time back to the subdome, where the rest of my group waited with visible relief. "Is Trevor okay?" Helen asked immediately. "He's alive," I said. "They got him to the helicopter and he's on his way to a hospital in Fresno. Beyond that, I don't know." We continued down to Little Yosemite Valley, packed up the camp in subdued silence, and made the long hike back to the trailhead. The rangers had arranged for vehicles to meet us there. Nobody was in a condition to drive themselves back to Groveland after what had happened. During the drive, I sat in the back of a ranger vehicle and listened to Byron talk to the others. He was telling the story again, how Trevor had slipped, how he'd tried to save him, how it had happened so fast. Each retelling was consistent in its details, but seemed to emphasize different aspects. Sometimes it was the speed of the fall. Sometimes it was Byron's attempt to grab him. Sometimes it was how Trevor should have been more careful. But always, there was the refrain: "It wasn't my fault." The company representative arrived at our headquarters in Groveland 2 hours later. A slick-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Virginia, head of human resources. She interviewed each member of the group separately, presumably gathering information for the inevitable insurance claims and potential lawsuits. When it was my turn, I told her everything factual. The timeline, Trevor's condition when we reached him, the response time of the helicopter. What I didn't tell her was my growing suspicion that Trevor's fall hadn't been an accident at all. Because by then I'd had time to think. Time to replay that overheard conversation from the night before. Time to remember Byron's odd insistence that it wasn't his fault, even before anyone had suggested it might be. Time to wonder why someone who'd just witnessed a horrific accident seemed more concerned with establishing his own innocence than with his colleagues' survival. That evening, after everyone had left and I was back at my small apartment in Groveland, I called my boss, Gary. "Hell of a thing," he said when he answered. "You did good work today. Could have been a lot worse." "Gary, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy." "Try me." So I told him. The argument. Byron's strange behavior. The emphasis on his lack of fault. The whole constellation of things that didn't quite add up to proof but gnawed at my gut anyway. Gary was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You think he pushed him?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it because I'm traumatized by what I saw today. But something feels wrong. If he pushed him, why would he go down with you to help? Why not just let the guy die?" It was a fair question. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe he panicked. Maybe he was establishing an alibi. Or maybe I'm completely wrong, and it really was just an accident. Look, Gary said carefully. What you're suggesting is serious. You can't just accuse someone of attempted murder based on a feeling, but if you really think something criminal happened, you need to talk to the cops, not me. Will they even listen? Probably not, unless Trevor wakes up and says he was pushed. But at least you'll have it on record. Your call. I thanked him and hung up, then spent the next 2 hours staring at my ceiling and debating with myself. By the time I finally fell into an uneasy sleep, I still hadn't decided what to do. The decision was made for me 3 weeks later. I was at headquarters preparing for another corporate trip when Gary called me into his office. His expression was serious.
Police want to talk to you. 2 detectives are on their way here now.
My heart kicked into a higher gear. Trevor, still in a coma, last I heard. But apparently someone else in your group mentioned the argument you heard that night. The cops are following up. The detectives arrived an hour later. A man and woman in their 40s, both with the weary, seen-it-all expressions of people who've spent too many years dealing with humanity's worst impulses. Detective Ramos was tall and angular. Detective Ortega was shorter, broader, with penetrating dark eyes. They set up in Gary's office and had me tell the story from start to finish. I did, including every detail I could remember. When I got to the part about the overheard argument, both detectives leaned forward slightly. Tell us exactly what you heard, Ramos said. Word for word, if you can remember. I reconstructed the conversation as best I could, including Byron's comment about out of the way and Trevor's fearful response. And you interpreted this as a physical threat? Ortega asked. At the time, no. I thought it was just office politics. But after the fall, after Byron's weird behavior, I trailed off. What weird behavior specifically? I described it all. The repeated insistence that it wasn't his fault. The way he seemed more focused on establishing his innocence than helping Trevor. The subtle wrongness of his emotional responses. The detectives took notes, asked follow-up questions, pushed me to separate what I'd observed from what I'd interpreted. When they finally closed their notebooks, Ramos looked at Ortega, and they shared one of those silent communications that partners develop. Thank you for your time, Ortega said. If we have follow-up questions, we'll be in touch. Can I ask? Do you think it was deliberate? Ramos chose his words carefully. We're investigating an incident that resulted in serious injuries. At this point, we're gathering all the facts and keeping an open mind about what happened. Which was cop speak for yes. We think something's fishy too. They left, and I never heard from them directly again. But I did some digging online over the next few months. Trevor had survived, barely. After 3 weeks in a coma, he'd woken up, though, with significant cognitive deficits and no memory of the fall itself. The investigation had apparently stalled without a witness who could say definitively whether he'd slipped or been pushed. Byron had moved to a different city, taken a position at another company. The startup had dissolved in the wake of the incident, and whatever internal conflicts had been brewing. And I was left with my suspicions and my memories. It's been years now since that day on Half Dome. I've led dozens of trips since then, all without serious incident. I've seen sunrises from mountain peaks, taught people to appreciate the wilderness, helped clients push past their limits and discover strengths they didn't know they had. But sometimes, usually at night, I think about Trevor lying broken on that granite slope. I think about Byron's hands, trembling but unhurt. I think about that overheard argument and wonder what exactly happened in those few seconds before Trevor fell. I don't know if Byron pushed him. I'll probably never know for certain. There's no evidence beyond circumstantial details and gut feelings. Trevor can't remember, and Byron has stuck to his story, an accident, a terrible tragedy, nothing more. But I know what I heard that night in the forest. I know what I saw in Byron's eyes as he stood over Trevor's broken body. And I know that when he said it wasn't my fault, he said it like a man trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The wilderness is a dangerous place. People fall, people get hurt, accidents happen. But sometimes I think they're given a little help along the way. And the most terrifying thing about that trip isn't the blood or the broken bones or the desperate helicopter ride. It's the possibility that I spent 2 days hiking with a murderer, watched him nearly succeed in killing someone, and then watched him walk away without consequences. That's the thought that keeps me awake some nights. staring at the ceiling of my Park Service housing, wondering if justice is something that actually exists or just a comfortable lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep. Because if Byron did push Trevor, and somewhere in my gut I believe he did, then he got away with it. He's out there somewhere, living his life, climbing corporate ladders instead of mountains. And Trevor is somewhere too, relearning how to walk, struggling with memories that have holes where crucial moments used to be, trying to rebuild a life that was shattered on a granite mountainside. I did everything right that day. I got help quickly. I administered first aid. I kept people safe. I saved a man's life. But I couldn't save him from whatever happened at the edge of that cliff. In those few seconds when I wasn't watching, when it was just Byron and Trevor and the truth that only one of them knows for certain. The wilderness keeps its secrets, and sometimes so do the people who walk through it. My name is Thomas Garcia, and I am 76 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened to me in 2015, when I was 67. I've kept this story to myself for years, but now, as I feel the weight of time pressing down on me, I realize it needs to be told. Whether you choose to believe it or not is up to you. All I can say is that every word is true as the scars on my body and the nightmares that still wake me in the dead of night. I was a Navy SEAL, stationed in Coronado, California. We were the best of the best, trained to handle anything the world could throw at us. Or so we thought. Nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered in the Nevada desert. Nothing. It was a sweltering July morning when Captain Jonas Frost called us into the briefing room. Jonas was a legend among SEALs, cool under pressure, sharp as a tack, and built like a brick wall. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room as we filed in, taking in each of us with a nod. "All right, gentlemen," he began, his voice gruff from years of barking orders and inhaling sand in far-flung war zones. "We've got a situation." The room fell silent. When Jonas said we had a situation, it usually meant things were about to get interesting. "We've received intel about a suspected terrorist cell operating out of an abandoned military base in Nevada," he continued, pulling up a satellite image on the screen behind him. "Near Area 51. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Area 51 was the stuff of conspiracy theories and bad sci-fi movies. But one look at Jonas's face told us this was no joke. "Yeah, I know how it sounds," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But we've got our orders. We go in, we neutralize any hostiles, we gather intel, and we get out. Simple as that." Simple. Right. Nothing was ever simple in our line of work. Jonas pointed to each of us in turn. "Garcia, Beltran, Heller, Kent, you're with me on this one. We move out at 0500 tomorrow. Any questions?" We all shook our heads. We'd been through countless missions together, and we trusted Jonas with our lives. Little did we know that this trust would be put to the ultimate test in the days to come. As we filed out of the briefing room, I caught up with Joe Axel Beltran. Axel was built like a tank with biceps the size of my head, and a chest like a barrel. But despite his intimidating appearance, he was one of the kindest men I'd ever met. "What do you make of this, Thomas?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I shrugged. "Sounds like a wild goose chase to me. But orders are orders, right?" Axel nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. It was the same doubt I felt gnawing at the pit of my stomach. Marcus Doc Heller joined us, adjusting his glasses. Doc was our medic, a brilliant guy with steady hands and a calm demeanor that had saved our asses more times than I could count. "You guys getting weird vibes from this mission too?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded. "Something doesn't feel right." "Come on, you two," Ethan Ghost Kent chimed in, seeming to materialize out of nowhere. Ghost was our sniper, silent as a shadow and twice as deadly. "It's just another day at the office. We go in, we do our job, we come home. Simple as that." If only it had been that simple. We took off at dawn the next day, the chopper blades slicing through the cool morning air. As we flew over the Nevada desert, I watched the landscape change beneath us. Lush coastal vegetation gave way to barren stretches of sand and rock, broken only by the occasional scrub brush or lonely cactus. The sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the air into a shimmering haze. By the time we touched down, several miles from our target, the heat was already oppressive. We disembarked quickly, our boots kicking up small clouds of dust as we hit the ground. Jonas gathered us around, his voice low but clear over the fading sound of the helicopter rotors. All right, listen up. We've got a 5-mile hike ahead of us. Keep your eyes open and stay alert. This may be the middle of nowhere, but that doesn't mean we're alone out here. We nodded, checking our gear one last time before setting out. The weight of our packs and body armor felt heavier than usual in the desert heat. Sweat began to bead on my forehead almost immediately, and I could feel it trickling down my back. As we marched, the silence of the desert pressed in around us. There was no bird song, no rustle of wind through leaves, just the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground and our own measured breathing. It was as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Axel fell into step beside me, his massive frame casting a shadow that provided momentary relief from the sun. "You ever been out this way before, Thomas?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. Nah, closest I've been is Vegas, and that was a whole different kind of desert. Axel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I bet. This place, it's something else, like being on another planet." He wasn't wrong. The landscape around us was alien and forbidding. Jagged rock formations jutted up from the earth like the broken teeth of some giant prehistoric beast. In the distance, heat mirages shimmered, creating the illusion of water where there was only more sand and stone. We walked for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky until it felt like we were walking on the surface of the sun itself. My throat was parched, my skin felt tight and hot, and every step was an effort of will. But we pressed on, driven by our training, and the knowledge that our mission could mean the difference between life and death for countless innocent people. As we crested a small rise, Jonas held up a fist, the signal to stop. We dropped to our knees, scanning the horizon. In the distance, barely visible through the heat haze, was a squat gray building, our target. "There it is," Jonas murmured, pulling out his binoculars. "Doesn't look like much, does it?" Ghost, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up. "Looks can be deceiving, Cap. You know that better than anyone." Jonas nodded, a grim smile on his face. "That I do, Kent. That I do." He turned to face us, his expression serious. "All right, we'll approach from the east. Use what cover we can. Keep your eyes open for any sign of movement or surveillance. Questions?" We shook our heads. We'd been through this drill 100 times before, but as we started moving again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. This time we were walking into something we couldn't possibly understand. Little did I know how right I was. As we drew closer to the base, the sense of wrongness grew stronger. The building was a relic from another era. Its concrete walls weathered and cracked, windows long since shattered. Sand had piled up against one side, as if the desert itself was trying to reclaim this intrusion into its domain. We approached cautiously, using what little cover the barren landscape provided. Ghost took point, his keen eyes scanning for any sign of movement or danger. The rest of us followed in a loose formation, weapons at the ready. When we reached the perimeter fence, we found it rusted and sagging, with large gaps that we could easily slip through. It was as if whoever had once guarded this place had simply walked away, leaving it to the mercy of the elements. "I don't like this," Axel muttered as we made our way towards the main entrance. "Where are the terrorists? Where's anybody?" Doc nodded in agreement. "It's too quiet, even for the desert." Jonas held up a hand, signaling for silence. We froze, listening intently. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the soft whisper of sand shifting in the breeze. Then, faintly, I heard something else. A low hum, barely audible, coming from somewhere inside the building. "You hear that?" I whispered. Jonas nodded, his face grim. "All right, we go in quiet. Standard sweep pattern. Watch each other's backs." We moved forward, our boots crunching softly on the sand-covered concrete. The main entrance was a pair of heavy metal doors, one hanging askew on its hinges. As we approached, I noticed strange markings etched into the metal, symbols I didn't recognize, curved lines and angular shapes that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Cap," I said, gesturing towards the markings. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Jonas studied the door for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Can't say that I have, Garcia. Some kind of code, maybe? Doc leaned in for a closer look, adjusting his glasses. These don't look like any language I've ever seen. And look at the way the metal's warped around them. It's like they were burned into the door somehow. We can play archaeologist later. Ghost cut in, his voice tense. Right now we need to focus on the mission. Jonas nodded. Ghost is right. We'll document everything once we've secured the area. Axel, you're on point. Let's move. Axel stepped forward, easing the door open with a soft groan of protesting metal. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness, and we all winced. But there was no response from inside, no sudden flurry of movement or shouts of alarm. We entered the building in a tight formation, our night vision goggles allowing us to see in the gloom. The interior was a mess of fallen ceiling tiles, broken furniture, and layers of dust. But beneath the decay, I could see signs of the building's former purpose. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens dark and cracked. Strange machines, their purpose unclear, stood silent sentinel in the corners. The low hum we'd heard outside was louder now, a constant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We moved deeper into the complex, checking rooms as we went. Most were empty, filled with nothing but dust and shadows. But as we progressed, we began to notice other things. Odd scratches on the walls, too deep and regular to be random. Patches of discoloration on the floor, dark stains that our imaginations filled in with grim possibilities. And always that incessant hum, growing louder with each step we took. It was in a room near the center of the complex that we found the first body. It was slumped in a corner, wearing the tattered remains of what might once have been a lab coat. As Doc knelt to examine it, I swept my rifle across the room, half expecting to see the killer lurking in the shadows. "What do we got, Doc?" Jonas asked, his voice low. Doc looked up, his face pale beneath his goggles. Wrong how?" Axel asked, moving closer. "The proportions are off. The limbs are too long. The skull is misshapen, and the skin." Doc swallowed hard. "It's not decomposing normally. It's like it's changing somehow." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air of the underground complex. What the hell had we stumbled into? Before anyone could respond, a scream echoed through the corridors, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly, leaving only the endless hum in its wake. We looked at each other, our faces mirrors of shock and fear. Then without a word, we moved towards the source of the scream, our training taking over despite the growing dread in our hearts. Whatever was waiting for us in the depths of this forsaken place, we would face it together. We were SEALs, the best of the best. We could handle anything, or so we thought. The scream had come from somewhere deeper in the complex, beyond a set of heavy blast doors that looked out of place in the dilapidated surroundings. Unlike the rest of the base, these doors were pristine, their metal surface unmarred by rust or dust. The same strange symbols we'd seen on the entrance were etched into these doors as well, seeming to pulse with an inner light. "What the hell is this place?" Axel muttered, his normally confident voice tinged with unease. Jonas studied the doors for a moment, his face unreadable behind his night vision goggles. "I don't know," he admitted, "but our job is to find out. Ghost, see if you can get these doors open." Ghost nodded and moved forward, examining the control panel next to the doors. After a few moments of tinkering, he shook his head. "No good, Cap. This system's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's not responding to any of my usual tricks." "Stand back," Axel said, reaching for his pack. "I'll blow it." But before he could retrieve his explosives, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a long corridor beyond. The hum that had been our constant companion since entering the base grew louder, taking on a pulsing quality that made my head throb. We exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between us. Something was very wrong here, but we had a job to do. With a nod from Jonas, we moved forward into the corridor. The air grew colder as we descended, our breath forming small clouds in front of our faces. The walls here were different, smooth and slightly reflective, made of some material I couldn't identify. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the corridor was much larger than it appeared. We had gone perhaps 100 yards when Ghost, who was on point, suddenly stopped. "Cap," he said, his voice tight with tension, You need to see this. We moved up to join him, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The corridor opened up into a vast chamber, easily the size of a football field, but it was what filled that chamber that made my blood run cold. Rows upon rows of glass tubes lined the walls, each filled with a cloudy liquid, and floating in each tube was something. They might have once been human, but now they were twisted, changed, limbs elongated to impossible lengths, skin translucent and shot through with pulsing veins, heads swollen and misshapen. "My God," Doc whispered, his face pale. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Welcome, gentlemen. We've been expecting you." We spun as one, weapons raised, to face the source of the voice. A figure stepped into the light, tall and thin, with long, spindly arms and a head that seemed too large for its body. Its skin was pale and slightly translucent, like the beings in the tubes, and its eyes were black pits that seemed to draw in the light around them. "Who are you?" Jonas demanded, his rifle trained on the figure's chest. "What is this place?" The figure smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Who we are is not important. What is important is what we represent. The future, gentlemen. The next step in human evolution." "Evolution?" Axel spat. "This looks more like a nightmare to me." The figure's smile widened. But nightmares are just the mind's way of preparing for possibilities it cannot yet comprehend. And you, my friends, are about to comprehend a great deal." It raised a hand, and suddenly the air was filled with a high-pitched whine that cut through my skull like a knife. I stumbled, my vision blurring, and I could hear the others crying out in pain around me. Through the haze of agony, I saw more figures emerging from the shadows, moving with an unnatural grace. They surrounded us, their black eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was decidedly inhuman. "Don't fight it," the first figure said, its voice somehow cutting through the noise in my head. "Embrace the change. Become part of something greater than yourselves." I felt hands on my arms, cold and strong, pulling me towards one of the empty tubes. Through the pain and confusion, I heard Jonas's voice, shouting orders, trying to rally us. "Fight, damn it. We're SEALs. We don't go down like this." His words cut through the fog in my mind, and I lashed out, breaking free from the grip of the creatures. I saw Axel nearby, his massive frame swinging wildly, sending two of the beings flying. Doc was on his knees, hands pressed to his ears, but at Jonas's words, he too began to struggle. Ghost was nowhere to be seen. The battle that followed was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Our weapons seemed to have little effect on the creatures, but our hand-to-hand training proved useful. We fought with everything we had, driven by desperation and the primal need to survive. But we were outnumbered, and these beings were stronger and faster than any human. One by one, my team began to fall. I saw Doc go down, overwhelmed by a group of the creatures that dragged him towards the tubes. Axel lasted longer, his incredible strength keeping him in the fight, but eventually, even he was subdued. I found myself back to back with Jonas, the two of us surrounded by a ring of the pale, inhuman figures. The leader watched from a distance, that terrible smile still on its face. "It's been a long time since we've had such entertaining specimens," it said. "Your resistance is admirable, but futile. Why not join us willingly? The process is much less uncomfortable that way." "Go to hell," Jonas spat, his voice ragged with exertion. The creature's smile widened. "Oh, my dear captain, we're already there." It raised its hand again, and the pain in my head intensified. I felt my knees buckle, and beside me Jonas let out a strangled cry. As my vision began to fade, I saw a ghost emerge from the shadows behind the leader, a strange device in his hands. There was a flash of light, a sound like reality itself tearing apart, and then darkness. I woke up in a military hospital, my body aching, and my mind reeling with fragmented memories of what had happened. Jonas was in the bed next to mine, his face pale and drawn. Of Axel and Doc, there was no sign. The official story was that we had stumbled upon a terrorist cell experimenting with chemical weapons. The base had been destroyed in an explosion, presumably triggered by the terrorists when they realized they had been discovered. Ghost was listed as killed in action. But Jonas and I knew the truth. We had seen things that defied explanation. horrors that haunted our dreams and made us question everything we thought we knew about the world. In the days and weeks that followed, we were debriefed countless times. Men in suits who never gave their names asked us the same questions over and over, probing for inconsistencies in our story. We stuck to the official version, knowing that the truth would sound too unbelievable. But late at night, when the hospital was quiet, Jonas and I would talk in whispers about what we had really seen, about the creatures that looked almost human but weren't, about the tubes filled with twisted, changing bodies, about the leader with its shark-like smile and eyes like black holes. And we would wonder about Ghost. Had he somehow escaped? Was the flash of light we saw some kind of weapon that destroyed the facility? Or had he been working for someone else all along, sent to make sure that whatever was in that base never saw the light of day? We never got answers to these questions. A month after the incident, Jonas disappeared. One day he was there, sitting in his hospital bed making plans for his recovery. And the next he was gone. No explanation, no trace left behind. It was as if he had never existed. I was discharged soon after, with a commendation for bravery and a not-so-subtle suggestion that I retire. I took the hint, walking away from the only life I had ever known. For years I tried to forget what had happened in that desert. I moved to a small town, took up fishing, did my best to live a normal life. But the memories never faded. The nightmares never stopped. Sometimes, I think I see them. A tall, thin figure at the edge of the crowd. A pair of two dark eyes watching me from across the street. A smile that's just a little too wide, with teeth that are just a little too sharp. And always in the back of my mind, there's that hum, that low pulsing sound that I heard in the bass. It's as if it's calling to me, trying to pull me back to that place of horror and transformation. I don't know if what we saw that day was real, or if it was some kind of mass hallucination brought on by experimental weapons or desert-induced madness. Part of me hopes it wasn't real, that it was all just a terrible dream. But a larger part of me knows the truth, knows that out there in the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert, something waits. Something that isn't human, that perhaps never was human. Something that sees us not as enemies to be defeated, but as raw material to be reshaped. And I know that one day it will come for me. One day the hum in my head will grow too loud to ignore, and I'll find myself drawn back to that place. Back to the tubes and the pain, and the promise of becoming something both more and less than human. Until then, I'll keep telling my story. Not because I expect anyone to believe it, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to be ready. Because if there's one thing I learned in that godforsaken base, it's this. The future is coming, whether we're ready for it or not. And it has teeth. My name's Travis Hawthorne, and I'm about to tell you a story that'll make you think twice about ever going camping again. It all started a few years back when I decided I needed a break from the rat race. As a freelance graphic designer, I had the luxury of working from anywhere with a decent internet connection. So I packed up my old RV, said goodbye to the city, and headed for the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. The plan was simple: find a quiet spot in the wilderness, set up camp, and spend a few weeks reconnecting with nature while still managing to meet my work deadlines. Little did I know that this trip would change my life forever, and not in the way those cheesy motivational posters promise. I'd been on the road for about a week when I found the perfect spot. It was a small clearing in the foothills, surrounded by towering pines, and with a babbling creek nearby. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and wild herbs. As I parked my RV and stepped out, I felt like I could finally breathe again after years of inhaling city smog. Setting up camp was a breeze. I'd done this enough times to have a system down pat. Solar panels for electricity, a portable satellite dish for internet, and a small propane stove for cooking. Within a couple of hours, I had a cozy little home away from home set up. That first night, as I sat by the campfire nursing a cold beer, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The crackling of the fire, the chirping of crickets, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze created a symphony of nature that no city soundscape could match. I leaned back in my camp chair, looking up at the star-filled sky, and thought to myself, this is the life. But even then, in that moment of tranquility, I felt a niggling sense of unease. It was subtle, like a whisper just on the edge of hearing. I brushed it off, blaming it on years of city living, making me paranoid about being alone in the woods. If only I'd listened to that little voice. If only I'd packed up and left right then. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. The next morning I woke up refreshed and ready to explore my surroundings. I spent the day hiking through the woods, marveling at the natural beauty around me. The Ouachita Mountains might not be as famous as the Rockies or the Appalachians, but they have a rugged charm all their own. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. I told myself it was just wildlife, squirrels or birds startled by my presence. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something that didn't belong in these woods any more than I did. I returned to my campsite as the sun was setting, the golden light filtering through the trees, creating long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. I busied myself with building a fire and preparing dinner, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. That night, as I lay in my RV trying to sleep, I heard it for the first time. A rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be an animal foraging for food. It circled my campsite, never coming too close, but never going too far either. I lay there, heart pounding, straining my ears to track its movement. Just as I was about to convince myself it was all in my head, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear, or a wolf, or any other animal I could think of. It was something else entirely. I didn't sleep a wink that night. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows of my RV, I made a decision. I needed backup. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy. I needed my best friend, Luke. Luke Carver and I had been friends since college. He was the yang to my yin, outgoing where I was introverted, athletic where I was bookish. But we shared a love for the outdoors and a thirst for adventure. When I called him that morning and told him about my creepy experience, he didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 2 days," he said. "Try not to get eaten by Bigfoot before I arrive." His joke should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Because what I'd heard last night wasn't Bigfoot. It was something much, much worse. The 2 days waiting for Luke were the longest of my life. I stayed close to my RV, only venturing out for necessities. The feeling of being watched was constant now, an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. At night, the rustling and growling continued, always just out of sight. When Luke's truck finally pulled into my campsite, I nearly wept with relief. He hopped out, all 6'2" of him, grinning from ear to ear. "Travis, my man," he boomed, pulling me into a bear hug. "What's this I hear about you getting spooked by some critters?" I tried to smile, but it felt forced. "It's not critters, Luke. It's something else." His grin faded as he saw the fear in my eyes. "All right, buddy. Tell me everything." Over the next hour, I recounted every detail of the past few days. The feeling of being watched, the rustling in the woods, the inhuman growl. Luke listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each passing minute. "That does sound freaky," he admitted when I finished. "But look, we're 2 grown men. Whatever's out there, we can handle it. And if we can't, well, that's what the shotgun in my truck is for." His confidence was infectious, and for the first time in days, I felt the knot of fear in my stomach begin to loosen. We spent the rest of the day setting up Luke's tent and reinforcing our campsite. We strung up extra lights, cleared away underbrush to improve visibility, and yes, made sure the shotgun was loaded and within easy reach. That night, as we sat by the fire, things almost felt normal. We reminisced about old times, told jokes, and made plans for hikes we wanted to take. But as the fire burned low and the woods around us grew darker, the old fear crept back in. "You hear that?" Luke whispered suddenly, sitting up straight. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. The rustling was back, closer than ever before. And then we saw it. A shadow, darker than the night around it, moving between the trees at the edge of our campsite. Luke reached for the shotgun, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey!" he shouted. "We see you! Come out where we can see you!" For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a speed that defied belief, the shadow burst from the tree line. It was on Luke before either of us could react. A massive darkness and flashing claws. The shotgun went off, the sound deafening in the quiet night, but it didn't seem to have any effect. I scrambled for the flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it on. When I finally managed to point it at Luke, I almost wished I hadn't. The thing attacking him was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was vaguely humanoid, but too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin was a sickly pale color, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. But its face, God, its face. It was featureless except for a wide, lipless mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. Luke was fighting for his life, but he was outmatched. The creature's claws were ripping through his clothes, leaving deep gashes in his flesh. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. "Travis," Luke screamed. "Do something." His voice snapped me out of my stupor. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to help my friend. My eyes fell on the campfire. Without thinking, I grabbed a burning log and charged at the creature. The thing let out an unearthly shriek as the flames touched its skin. It recoiled, releasing Luke, who collapsed to the ground. I swung the log again and again, driven by a mixture of terror and rage. The creature backed away, still shrieking, its glowing eyes fixed on me with a hatred that chilled me to my core. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, melting back into the darkness of the forest. I dropped the log and rushed to Luke's side. He was in bad shape, bleeding from multiple wounds. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Luke nodded weakly. What was that thing?" he gasped. I shook my head, helping him to his feet. "I don't know, but we're getting out of here, now." As I half-carried, half-dragged Luke to my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't done with us, and I had a sinking feeling that no matter how far we ran, it would find us again. Little did I know, our nightmare was just beginning. The drive to the nearest hospital was a blur of adrenaline and fear. Luke was in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat, his breathing shallow and ragged. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing after us. We made it to the emergency room in record time. As the doctors whisked Luke away, I was left to try and explain what had happened. I mumbled something about a bear attack, knowing they'd never believe the truth. The police were called, and I gave them the same story. They seemed skeptical, but had no reason to doubt me. Hours passed in a haze of bad coffee and worried pacing. Finally, a doctor emerged to give me an update. Luke was stable, but had lost a lot of blood. The wounds were unlike anything they'd seen before, deep, jagged tears that seemed to resist traditional treatment. "What kind of bear did you say this was?" the doctor asked, eyeing me suspiciously. I swallowed hard. She didn't look convinced, but didn't press the issue. "Your friend is asking for you," she said, leading me to Luke's room. Luke looked terrible, pale and wrapped in bandages. He barely resembled the strong, confident man who had arrived at my campsite just days ago. But his eyes were clear as they met mine. "Travis," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk about what happened." I nodded, pulling up a chair beside his bed. For the next hour, we pieced together the events of that night, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The more we talked, the more certain we became that this was no ordinary animal attack. "We need to find out what that thing was," Luke said, wincing as he tried to sit up. "It's still out there, Travis, and I don't think it's going to stop with us." I knew he was right, but the thought of going back into those woods filled me with dread. "What can we do? No one's going to believe us if we tell them the truth." Luke was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need to do some research," he said finally. "There must be records, stories, something that can tell us what we're dealing with." And so began our hunt for answers. While Luke recovered in the hospital, I spent every waking moment in the local library, poring over old newspapers, local history books, and folklore collections. I even reached out to some cryptozoology forums online, though most of the responses I got were from people who thought I was making it all up. But slowly a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades there were reports of strange occurrences in the Ouachita Mountains. Hikers gone missing, unexplained animal attacks, sightings of creatures that defied explanation. Most were brushed off as hoaxes or the product of overactive imaginations. But there were enough consistencies to make me believe we weren't the first to encounter this thing. One story in particular caught my attention. In 1952, a group of campers had gone missing in an area not far from where Luke and I had set up our camp. The only survivor was a young boy who was found weeks later, alive but deeply traumatized. His description of what had attacked their campsite matched what we had seen, a tall skeletal creature with pale skin and glowing eyes. Armed with this information, I returned to the hospital to share my findings with Luke. He listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "We need to go back," he said when I finished. I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you insane? That thing nearly killed you." Luke's eyes met mine, filled with a determination I hadn't seen before. "Exactly. It's dangerous, Travis, and it's still out there. What if it attacks someone else, someone who isn't as lucky as we were?" I wanted to argue, to tell him he was crazy for even considering going back. But deep down, I knew he was right. We couldn't just walk away from this. We had a responsibility to stop this thing, or at least try to understand it better. As Luke checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice, I found myself wondering what we were getting ourselves into. We were just two ordinary guys, way out of our depth, but we were also the only ones who knew the truth about what was lurking in those mountains. We spent the next few days preparing. We bought more powerful flashlights, a night vision camera, and yes, more weapons. Luke insisted on bringing his shotgun, and I picked up a high-powered rifle. We didn't know if conventional weapons would work against this creature, but we weren't going in unprepared again. As we drove back towards the Ouachita Mountains, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, hiding secrets that maybe were better left undiscovered. But there was no turning back now. The hunt had begun, and we were determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. The familiar sight of the Ouachita Mountains looming on the horizon filled me with a mixture of dread and determination. As we navigated the winding roads leading into the wilderness, Luke and I went over our plan one more time. We set up camp in a clearing, open area with good visibility, Luke said, his voice tight with tension. "We stay alert, we stay together, and at the first sign of trouble, we don't hesitate. Agreed?" I nodded, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Agreed. We chose a spot about a mile from our original campsite, close enough to investigate but far enough that we hoped to have some warning if the creature decided to pay us a visit. As we set up our equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig set my nerves on edge. Night fell quickly, the darkness seeming to ooze from between the trees like a living thing. We sat by our fire, weapons close at hand, straining our ears for any sound out of the ordinary. The normal nighttime noises of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the chirp of crickets, were conspicuously absent. It was as if the entire woods were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "You feel that?" Luke whispered, his eyes scanning the tree line. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. It was the calm before the storm, and we both knew it. That's when we heard it, a low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Luke and I were on our feet in an instant, backs to each other, weapons raised. "Come on, you bastard," Luke muttered. "Show yourself." As if in answer to his challenge, a shadow detached itself from the darkness at the edge of our camp. It moved with that same impossible speed we'd seen before, darting from tree to tree faster than our eyes could follow. Luke fired his shotgun, the blast shattering the eerie silence of the forest. The creature let out an unearthly shriek, more of rage than pain, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of it in the muzzle flash, all pale skin and twisted limbs, those glowing eyes fixed on us with murderous intent. "Did you hit it?" I yelled, my own rifle trained on the spot where I'd last seen the thing. "I don't know," Luke replied, quickly reloading. "It moved so fast." His words were cut off as the creature burst from the shadows again, this time heading straight for me. I squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report deafening at such close range. I felt the impact as the bullet struck home, but it didn't seem to slow the thing down at all. In a blur of motion, it was on me. The stench of decay filled my nostrils as I found myself staring into those glowing eyes, face to face with a nightmare-made flesh. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my jacket like it was tissue paper. The pain was immediate and intense, but adrenaline kept me fighting. I heard Luke shouting, felt the heat as he swung a burning branch from the fire at the creature. It recoiled with a hiss, giving me just enough space to scramble away. Blood soaked my shirt, but I forced myself to my feet, grabbing my fallen rifle. The creature crouched at the edge of our camp, its form seeming to shift and waver in the firelight. I was hurt. I could tell that much, but nowhere near as badly as it should have been given the hits it had taken. "What the hell is this thing?" Luke gasped, standing beside me, his shotgun trained on the monster. Before I could answer, the creature spoke. Its voice was like gravel being crushed, a sound that seemed to bypass our ears and resonate directly in our minds. "Foolish humans," it growled. "You cannot stop hunger." Luke and I exchanged a shocked glance. In all our research, in all the stories we'd uncovered, there had never been any mention of the creature speaking. "What are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Why are you here?" The thing's mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "I am eternal," it said. "I am the shadow in your nightmares. I am hunger incarnate." It began to move towards us again, its movements jerky and unnatural. Luke fired another round from his shotgun, the blast tearing into the creature's shoulder. It stumbled but didn't fall. "Run," I yelled, grabbing Luke's arm and pulling him towards the truck. We sprinted through the darkness, branches whipping at our faces, the sound of the creature's pursuit close behind. We reached the truck and I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with blood. Just as I heard the click of the door unlocking, a weight slammed into me from behind. I was thrown to the ground, the creature on top of me, its claws digging into my back. Luke's shotgun roared again, and suddenly the weight was gone. I scrambled to my feet and dove into the truck, Luke right behind me. As I gunned the engine and peeled out of the clearing, I caught one last glimpse of the creature in the rearview mirror. It stood at the edge of the woods, those glowing eyes fixed on us, and I swear I could hear its voice in my head. "This is not over." We drove through the night, not stopping until we were miles away from the mountains. As the adrenaline wore off, the pain from my injuries hit me full force. Luke wasn't in much better shape. "We need to go to the hospital," he said, his voice weak. I shook my head. "We can't. How do we explain this? They'll think we're crazy, or worse, that we did this to each other." "Then what do we do?" Luke asked. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. "We need help," I said finally. "Professional help. Someone who might actually believe us." "Who?" Luke asked skeptically. I took a deep breath. "I think I know someone. An old professor of mine from college, Dr. Eleanor Vance. She specialized in folklore and mythology, but I always got the sense she believed there was more truth to the old stories than most people thought." Luke nodded slowly. "Okay, where do we find her?" I set my jaw, a plan forming in my mind. "Last I heard, she was teaching at a university in New Orleans. Looks like we're taking a road trip." As we drove south, leaving the Uchida Mountains behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The creature's words echoed in my mind. "This is not over." I had a sinking feeling it was right. Our encounter in the woods was just the beginning of something much bigger and much more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. Little did we know, our journey to New Orleans would lead us down a rabbit hole of ancient legends, dark rituals and horrors beyond our wildest nightmares. The hunt for answers had begun, but the truth we would uncover would change our lives forever. New Orleans was a city unlike any other, a place where the veil between the mundane and the mystical seemed particularly thin. As Luke and I drove into the city, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of magnolias, I couldn't help but feel we'd stepped into another world entirely. We found Dr. Eleanor Vance's office at Tulane University with relative ease. As we waited outside her door, I found myself second-guessing our decision. How were we going to explain what had happened to us? Would she even believe us? The door opened, and Dr. Vance stepped out. She was older than I remembered. Her once dark hair, now streaked with gray, but her eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. Travis Hawthorne, she said, a smile spreading across her face. It's been a long time. And who's your friend? I made the introductions and Dr. Vance ushered us into her office. It was cluttered with books, artifacts and papers, every surface covered in the detritus of a lifetime of academic pursuit. Now, she said, settling behind her desk. What brings you boys all the way to New Orleans? Somehow I don't think this is a social call. Luke and I exchanged a glance, and then, haltingly at first but with growing urgency, we told her everything. The camping trip, the first encounter with the creature, our ill-fated return to the mountains. Dr. Vance listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When we finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a large bookshelf, pulling down a heavy leather-bound tome. What you encountered, she said, her voice grave, is something very old and very dangerous. In my field, we call it the Wendigo. She opened the book, revealing illustrations that made my blood run cold. There, rendered in faded ink, was the creature we'd seen in the woods. The Wendigo is a creature from Algonquian folklore, Dr. Vance explained. It's a spirit of hunger and winter, of famine and desperation. According to legend, it was once human, but was transformed by an act of cannibalism into a monster with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. But that's just a legend, right? Luke asked, his voice hopeful. Dr. Vance's eyes met his, and I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Legends often have a basis in fact, Mr. Carver. And in my experience, the older and more widespread a legend is, the more likely it is to have some truth to it. She turned a few more pages in the book, revealing accounts of Wendigo encounters spanning centuries. What's unusual about your experience, she mused, is the location. Wendigo legends are typically associated with the northern forests of North America. The Ouachita Mountains are far south of their usual range. So why was it there? I asked. Dr. Vance shook her head. I'm not sure, but I have a theory. The world is changing, gentlemen. Climate shifts, deforestation, urban expansion. We're altering the natural order of things. It's possible that we're forcing these creatures out of their traditional territories, driving them into new areas. The implications of her words were terrifying. If she was right, it meant that what we'd encountered might not be an isolated incident. It could be happening all over. What can we do? Luke asked, leaning forward in his chair. How do we stop this thing? Dr. Vance's expression was grim. Stopping a Wendigo is no easy task. According to the old stories, they're nearly indestructible. Fire can hurt them, and there are rituals that are said to be able to banish them, but they're complex and dangerous. She stood, walking to a cabinet in the corner of her office. From it she withdrew a small ornate box. I've spent my life collecting artifacts and knowledge related to creatures like the Wendigo, she said. I never thought I'd have cause to use them, but, well, here we are. She opened the box, revealing a collection of small objects. A bundle of herbs, a vial of dark liquid, a small, intricately carved piece of bone. This is a banishing kit, she explained. Used correctly, it might be able to drive the Wendigo away, maybe even destroy it. But I must warn you, using this comes with great risk. The ritual is complex, and if done incorrectly, it could have catastrophic consequences. Luke and I looked at each other, a silent communication passing between us. We both knew the risks, knew that going back to face that thing was probably suicidal. But we also knew we couldn't just walk away. Not now, not knowing what we knew. Teach us, I said, turning back to Dr. Vance. Show us how to use it. She nodded slowly, her expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. Very well. But remember, once you start down this path, there's no turning back. The knowledge I'm about to share with you will change you, will open your eyes to a world most people never see. Are you sure you're ready for that? Luke's hand found mine, squeezing it tight. We're sure, he said, his voice steady. Dr. Vance took a deep breath. Then let's begin. We have much to cover, and I fear time is not on our side. As she began to explain the intricacies of the banishing ritual, I felt a shiver run down my spine. We were about to step into a world of ancient magic and primal fears, a world where the monsters from our nightmares were all too real, but we had no choice. The Wendigo was out there, and it had to be stopped. Our education in the dark arts had begun, and with it the final chapter of our terrifying adventure in the Ouachita Mountains. The next few days were a blur of intense study and preparation. Dr. Vance's knowledge seemed boundless, encompassing not just the lore of the Wendigo, but a whole hidden world of supernatural entities and arcane rituals. Luke and I absorbed as much as we could, our minds reeling with information that challenged everything we thought we knew about reality. We learned that the Wendigo was just one of many creatures that existed in the shadows of our world. There were others. Spirits, monsters, things that defied easy classification. Dr. Vance called them the Hidden Ones, entities that had coexisted with humanity since the dawn of time, occasionally intersecting with our world in ways that gave rise to myths and legends. The Wendigo is among the most dangerous of the Hidden Ones, Dr. Vance explained one evening as we pored over ancient texts. It's a creature of pure hunger, of insatiable appetite. In some legends, it's said to grow larger with each victim it consumes, but never to be satisfied. How does it choose its victims? Luke asked, his face pale in the lamplight. Dr. Vance's expression was grim. It's drawn to isolation, to vulnerability, lone travelers, lost hikers, people who've strayed too far from the safety of civilization. But once it's found a hunting ground, it won't stop until it's driven away or destroyed. The implications of her words hit me hard. How many people had fallen victim to this thing over the years? How many disappearances written off as accidents or misadventure were actually the work of the Wendigo? As we delved deeper into our studies, strange things began to happen. I started having vivid nightmares, dreams of running through endless dark forests, always pursued by something I couldn't quite see. Luke reported similar experiences, along with a growing sense of being watched, even in the safety of our hotel room. Dr. Vance wasn't surprised. The more you learn about this world, the more aware of it you become, she said. And the more aware you are, the more it becomes aware of you. Be careful. Knowledge is power, but it also paints a target on your back. Despite the warnings, we pressed on. We practiced the banishing ritual until we could recite it in our sleep, familiarized ourselves with the use of each component in the kit Dr. Vance had given us. We also prepared more mundane defenses, silver bullets, which folklore suggested might be effective, flares, and more conventional weapons. As our departure date approached, Dr. Vance grew increasingly somber. On our last night in New Orleans, she called us to her home, a centuries-old house in the Garden District that seemed to breathe history. "There's something I need to tell you," she said as we settled into her study. "Something I should have told you from the beginning. But, well, I wasn't sure how." Luke and I exchanged worried glances. What more could there possibly be? Dr. Vance took a deep breath. "The Wendigo you encountered, I don't think it's a coincidence that it appeared in the Ouachita Mountains. I think it was drawn there. By me." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Finally, I managed to speak.
What do you mean? Drawn there by you?
She stood, walking to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. From it she withdrew a small, ancient-looking artifact, a carved piece of bone, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "This is a Wendigo tooth," she explained. "An artifact of immense power in certain circles. I acquired it years ago, part of my research into the Hidden Ones. I thought I had it properly contained, but, well, these things have a way of making themselves known." "Are you saying that thing is after this?" Luke asked, eyeing the tooth warily. Dr. Vance nodded. "It's a part of it, in a very real sense. Wendigos are drawn to their own essence. I had the tooth in my possession when I visited the Ouachita Mountains for a conference last year. I think I may have inadvertently lured it there." The implications of her words were staggering. All those people who had gone missing, all the terror we'd experienced, it all traced back to this small piece of bone. "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. "Because you need to know what you're really up against," Dr. Vance replied, her voice heavy with regret. "And because I'm coming with you." Luke and I started to protest, but she held up a hand to silence us. "This is my responsibility," she said firmly. "I brought this creature to those mountains, however unintentionally. I need to help make it right." As we left Dr. Vance's house that night, my mind was reeling. We were about to head back into the belly of the beast, armed with knowledge that seemed more like fantasy than fact. And now we had a new complication. a scholar with a guilty conscience and a magical artifact that might be the key to stopping the Wendigo once and for all. The road ahead was dark and fraught with danger, but we had no choice but to follow it to its end. The Wendigo was waiting, and this time we were determined to end its reign of terror for good. As we prepared for our journey back to the Ouachita Mountains, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much bigger than we realized. The hidden ones, the ancient artifacts, the dark knowledge we'd gained. It all pointed to a world far more complex and terrifying than we'd ever imagined. But ready or not, it was time to face the monster in the woods. The final battle was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The fate of not just the Ouachita Mountains, but perhaps the whole world, hung in the balance. The drive back to the Ouachita Mountains was tense, each mile bringing us closer to a confrontation we knew might be our last. Dr. Vance sat in the back seat, the Wendigo tooth safely enclosed in a lead-lined box on her lap. Luke drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while I pored over our notes, committing every detail of the banishing ritual to memory. As we entered Arkansas, the landscape seemed to change, becoming wilder, more primeval. The trees loomed taller, their shadows deeper and more menacing. Even the air felt different, heavy with an electric charge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "It knows we're coming," Dr. Vance said softly from the back seat. "Can you feel it?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The sense of wrongness grew stronger with each passing mile, a palpable aura of malevolence that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. We set up camp in a clearing not far from where we'd encountered the Wendigo before. As night fell, we made our final preparations. Luke and I checked and rechecked our weapons, while Dr. Vance laid out the components for the ritual. "Remember," she said, her voice tight with tension, "the ritual must be performed precisely. One mistake, one mispronounced word, and we could make things much, much worse." "No pressure," Luke muttered, but his attempt at humor fell flat. As the last light faded from the sky, we gathered around the small fire we'd built. Dr. Vance opened the lead box, carefully removing the Wendigo tooth. Even in the flickering firelight, I could see strange symbols writhing across its surface as if alive. "This will draw it to us," she explained. "Be ready." She began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, her voice rising and falling in an eerie cadence. The woods around us grew unnaturally still, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Then we heard it, that familiar bone-chilling growl, closer than I'd expected. Luke and I were on our feet in an instant, weapons raised. It emerged from the darkness like a living shadow, its form seeming to shift and waver in the firelight, those glowing eyes fixed on us with a hunger that was almost palpable. "Now," Dr. Vance shouted. Luke and I opened fire, the sound of gunshots shattering the eerie silence. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound that seemed to bypass our ears and resonate directly in our skulls. It charged forward with impossible speed, claws extended. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as those deadly talons missed me by inches. Luke wasn't so lucky. The creature caught him with a glancing blow, sending him sprawling. "Luke!" I yelled, firing again and again at the monster. The bullets seemed to have little effect, but they did draw its attention away from my fallen friend. Dr. Vance's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The air around us began to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending. The Wendigo let out another unearthly shriek, this one tinged with what sounded like fear. It turned towards Dr. Vance, recognizing the true threat. I saw its muscles bunch, preparing to spring. "No," I shouted, throwing myself between the creature and Dr. Vance. I felt a searing pain as its claws raked across my back, but I held my ground. "Finish it," I yelled to Dr. Vance. Through a haze of pain, I heard her speak the final words of the ritual. There was a flash of blinding light, and a sound like reality tearing apart. The Wendigo's shriek rose to a deafening pitch, and I felt its weight disappear from my back. When my vision cleared, I saw the creature writhing on the ground, its form seeming to dissolve at the edges. Dr. Vance stood over it, the Wendigo tooth in one hand, the other extended towards the monster. She was speaking again, her voice commanding and powerful. The Wendigo thrashed and howled, its cries becoming more human, more agonized. I watched in horrified fascination as its form began to shrink, the twisted limbs and elongated features receding. And then, in a final flash of light, it was over. Where the Wendigo had been, there now lay a man. Gaunt, naked, and very human. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the man's eyes fluttered open, and he spoke in a voice hoarse from disuse. "Thank you," he whispered. "You freed me." As Dr. Vance knelt beside the man, checking his vitals, I rushed to Luke's side. He was conscious but dazed, a nasty gash on his forehead. "Did we do it?" he asked, his voice weak. "Is it over?" I looked back at the human form of what had once been the Wendigo, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Yeah," I said, "I think it is." But even as I spoke the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. We had faced one of the hidden ones and survived, but at what cost? And what other horrors might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to enter our world? As the adrenaline of the fight began to fade, I found myself staring into the dark woods surrounding us. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw other eyes staring back, ancient, hungry eyes that spoke of terrors yet to come. The Wendigo was defeated, but our journey into the world of the hidden ones was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The days following our confrontation with the Wendigo passed in a blur of police statements, hospital visits, and sleepless nights. The official story, carefully crafted by Dr. Vance, painted a picture of a deranged man living in the woods, responsible for the disappearances and attacks. It was a tale full of holes, but it was still more believable than the truth. The man we had rescued, the human form of the Wendigo, was identified as Robert Chandler, a hiker who had gone missing in the Ouachita Mountains over 30 years ago. His reappearance and apparent lack of aging baffled medical professionals, but Dr. Vance's connections helped smooth over the most difficult questions. As for Luke and me, we were hailed as heroes by the local community, though they didn't know the half of what we'd really faced. Our wounds healed slowly, leaving scars that would serve as permanent reminders of our encounter with the supernatural. A week after the incident, Dr. Vance called us to her hotel room. She looked tired, the events of the past days clearly weighing heavily on her. "I owe you both an explanation," she said, gesturing for us to sit, "and an apology." Over the next hour, she laid out a story that shook the foundations of everything we thought we knew about the world. The hidden ones, she explained, were more than just folklore or isolated incidents. They were part of a vast, interconnected web of supernatural entities that existed alongside our reality. "There are those of us who know about this world," she said. "Scholars, hunters, protectors. We work in the shadows to keep the balance, to prevent the hidden ones from wreaking havoc on our world." "And you want us to join you," Luke said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Vance nodded slowly. "You've seen things most people never will. You faced one of the most dangerous of the hidden ones and survived. That kind of experience, it changes you. You can try to go back to your old lives, but I suspect you'll find that difficult." She was right, of course. Even in the short time since our encounter with the Wendigo, I'd found myself jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every dark corner. The world seemed different now, more dangerous but also more wondrous. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Training," Dr. Vance replied. "Knowledge. A chance to make a difference in a war most people don't even know is being fought. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be safe. But it will be important." Luke and I exchanged a look. We'd been through hell together, faced a monster straight out of nightmare. The thought of going back to our old lives seemed impossible now. "We're in," Luke said, and I nodded in agreement. Dr. Vance smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Welcome to the fight, gentlemen. I have a feeling you're going to do great things." As we left Dr. Vance's room that night, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. We were about to step into a world of shadows and secrets, of ancient magics and primal fears, but we were also joining a brotherhood of protectors, standing guard against the darkness that threatened to overwhelm our world. The Ouachita Mountains had changed us, shown us a reality we could never unsee. But it had also awakened something in us, a determination to face the darkness, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As we drove away from the mountains, leaving behind the site of our terrifying adventure, I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The world was bigger and more dangerous than we'd ever imagined. but we were ready to face it. The hunt for the hidden ones had only just begun, and we were now a part of it. Whatever came next, whatever horrors we might face, we would face them together, because that's what it meant to be a guardian of the hidden world, a protector against the terrors that lurked in the shadows. Our old lives were over. A new chapter had begun, and somewhere out there in the darkness, the hidden ones were waiting.